G'day guys, and today I have really good news coming out from Australia. I am very pleased to announce that Australia will not be joining the United Nations Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration next month. So our Prime Minister Scott Morrison has come out and said that Australia will be not participating, not signing into this pact next month, as it will, quote, be used to undermine Australia's strong border protection laws and practices. Now, I wouldn't actually be surprised if many of my fellow Australians didn't know what this was. It has been complete radio silence down here, down under. I imagine establishment groups were hoping no one would notice and they could just talk about other things, and this would be passed without us really knowing about it and kicking up a stink. So the UN Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration from the UN's own website is a non-binding cooperative framework on migration. The Global Compact is to be a global agreement aimed at sharing responsibilities and at ensuring security, peace, dignity, protection and respect for the human rights of all migrants and refugees. And straight away, we can see the problems that I will begin to highlight. This all sounds pretty good, ensuring security, peace, dignity, but it doesn't tell us how it's going to do these things. So currently all nations of the UN, besides the US, Hungary, Austria, the Czech Republic and Israel, have agreed to sign on. So what are my issues with this UN Global Compact? Well, as I've already mentioned, it's very newspeaky, it's very vague, it's very broad. If you want to go into a full in-depth analysis, I was going to do a video on it, but then I kind of realized it was going to take me until they signed the compact, and by then it's too late. But I highly recommend Stefan Molyneux' excellent video. He manages to condense it all down to the most important talking points within an hour and 17 minutes. And if you watch that video, you'll see it's very newspeaky, lots of positive adjectives, but very, very vague. They make no mention of how any of this will be funded. Of course, migrants are very expensive. Raising people up into first world living standards is very expensive, so there's no mention of how it will all be funded. There is no data to back up their claims. Obviously, they're not going to source citations for how expensive migrants are in Germany and Sweden and things like that, how many taxpayers it takes to fund a single migrant and things like that. They do chalk out a lot of narratives without any data to back it up, so it's completely unsourced. Whilst I have mentioned that the Global Compact is non-binding, there is the potential for it to become legalistic and binding, whereas if Australia had signed on, we would be trapped in this bureaucratic nightmare where our national sovereignty has been erased. So what essentially would occur is, in the gist of it, Australia would defer its border control to the UN. We would have no control over our own borders and no ability to say, no, we will not be funding these migrants. For all intents and purposes, this compact would erase Australia's borders and keep the Australian taxpayers perpetually enslaved to waves and waves of incoming economic migrants. So that's the UN's Global Compact in a nutshell, essentially. I shall read you some more statements from Mr. Morrison as to why he has rejected this compact, thankfully. So, quote, "This compact will not add anything to enhancing our capacity to control our borders and manage our successful immigration program." What you have to understand is that here in Australia, when the Labor government was in power, there were upwards of 20,000 people arriving illegally here per year. And when the Liberals got in and started, detention centres, turning the boats back, those numbers dropped down into the low hundreds. There's that absolute massive drop off once Australia actually started defending and managing the border. He goes on to say, "The compact fails to adequately distinguish between people who enter Australia illegally and those who come to Australia the right way, particularly with respect to the provision of welfare and other benefits. This is inconsistent with the management of Australia's strong and orderly migration program under the Liberal National Government." And he's totally right. If you read into the report, there's no distinction between illegal and legal immigrants. They sort of half-ass it and call illegal immigrants irregular migrants. So there's no distinction between illegal and legal migrants, and they both get the same benefits, which is a certain standard of living outlined in the Global Compact. And I'm not going to question any of my viewers' intelligence. We all know what would happen if this compact would come to pass. The erasure of borders and the dangling of the golden carrot of welfare would basically cause every single third worlder in the world to uproot and move into the first world, which would quickly turn it into the third world. I've seen some statistics that claim that in Germany, or countries like Germany with enormous welfare states, a entering migrant can earn 10 times as much money as they can collecting welfare as they can working back in their home country. And this is an enormous incentive for people to come here. Anyone who acts like this compact can be passed, the borders can be erased, and nothing will happen, doesn't have two brain cells to rub together, to put it bluntly. Now, I'm aware it has been discussed that some people have said, oh yes, Australia has proposed that they will reject this bill, but they won't actually. They'll cuck out and they'll sign on to the compact. At this point in time, I don't side with that opinion for a couple of reasons. The first of all is that why would Scott Morrison, or ScoMo as he's known down under, why would Scott Morrison, who is already on shaky ground for the 2019 election as he has knifed his predecessor in the back, why would Scott Morrison, or ScoMo as he's known down under, make a public statement saying, hey, we're not going to do this, it's bad for this reasons, A, B, C? Why would he then double-cross his core fans especially by backtracking and signing onto the deal? This is a very public declaration. He'll get reamed over the coals very, very, very hard if he backflips on this. Additionally, he has also made moves to, for example, lower Sydney and Melbourne's migration cap. So I believe that he is actually interested in protecting the border. He was one of the people in charge of designing Australia's stricter border control laws. So in that respect, he has a good track record for this kind of thing. Additionally, it's also a great talking point. The Liberal Party does reminding the country that, Labor was fucking everything up by letting in the boats and migration and welfare and not controlling the borders and things like that. It's a great talking point for them to say, hey, look at it, we came in and we solved this problem in a heartbeat. So this could end up being a big election issue with the Liberals saying, you got to keep Labor out, otherwise they're going to backflip and sign on to this compact and things like that in an effort to, stoke up fear, essentially, that Australia will have its borders erased, its sovereignty destroyed, and, as I said, will be enslaved to economic migrants. This could help drive voter turnout. I'm extremely pleased that Scott Morrison seems to have stood on principle and denied this globalistic venture, and I believe in a couple of years we'll see how right we were, despite, there's going to be some serious haranguing about this. My refugee rights and things like that. I think in a couple of years we're going to learn that this was an amazing idea. Common sense, will prevail, I believe. It'll just take a few years, because we're going to watch other countries just become vassals for economic migrants. The native population just drained and drained, and the economy's tanking, and greater amounts of percentage of GDP directed towards welfare and things like that. I think this will be a really positive move for Australia. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.